Yes, it's me, Mike Stone, and this is the Backseat Driver Podcast. This episode is brought to you by Gas Shocks, home of the 116 Trophy and 120 Coupe Cup. Hoddy Tyres, find the best tyres for your vehicle, supplying all the top brands to keep you covered in every season and every condition. Tarox Brakes, the art of slowing down, precision engineered in Italy for ultimate performance, and Specialised Automotive Services, specialists in high quality automotive maintenance and classic car restoration. You can find the details of all our proud sponsors for this episode in the show notes. I'd like to introduce the Backseat Driver an author, and I'm introducing him for the third time. His ability to produce and write books is prodigious, to say the least, and when you see the books he produces, it is stunning how he produces them and writes them with such regularity. Well, Jon Saltinstall has been at it again. So, Jon, welcome back to the Backseat Driver.
Good morning, Mark. It's great to be back with you.
Now, this time, it is on the one, the only, to give her full name, Maria Grazia Lombardi, better known as Lella Lombardi, the Lioness of Turin, and one of the world's few F1 drivers. There have been many, many lady racing drivers, but one of the most famous ones being Helle Nice, but Lella scored a point driving an F1 car. How did all this come about? How did you choose to write a biography of Lella Lombardi? Because, I mean, she passed away in March 1992, so regrettably for a lot of people, she's been forgotten about.
She's an enigmatic figure in many ways, Mark, and it's something I'd wanted to do. It's a book I'd wanted to write for about 20 years, but Lella is fascinating.
Just supposing Nicky Lauda and Jackie Hicks got in the way.
Well, yeah, there have been other things I've been bimbling around with for years, but it was doing it and Lauda sort of gives you the ticket to be able to do other things because you've got a degree of credibility and people give you opportunities. But Lella had fascinated me since, crikey, 1975, really, when I first saw her in Autosport as featuring in the forthcoming F1 season. I'm thinking, right, I might not know that much, but I know that you don't see many women racing in F1. She's your classic pub quiz question, isn't she? Who's the only woman to ever finish F1 in a point scoring position? And the Anorax will say yes, I know, but she only scored half a point, didn't she? And the other Anorax will hopefully put them right and say yes, but she finished in the top six at a time when it was only the top six that got you points, not top 10 as it is now, and the strength in depth was a bit different. But the problem with that, of course, is that motorsport has got such a focus on F1 and keeps it under the spotlight all the time that anybody who achieves anything or gets there, it overshadows everything else. And that is absolutely the case with Lella. That half point in F1 completely outshines everything else that she did for a lot of people. Yeah. As a consequence of that, her other achievements sort of disappear. This is a woman who she won the Formula A 50 championship in Italy in 1970 against some guys who became top line F2 drivers. People like Giorgio Francia and Bill Collins. She won the Escort Mexico championship in Italy in 73. She won 3 races in the World Sports Car Championship. Admittedly, when the series wasn't its top flight, but nonetheless she did it. Against proper opposition. Yeah. She was the first woman to ever hold an F1 contract, a works F1 contract. Her and Christine Dacramond in 1976, highest finish at Le Mans by an all-female crew since 1930. The record still stands. And then numerous Class 2 European Touring Car Division 2 victories in the 1980s. Now, by anybody's career, you'd think that's a fairly, that's a pretty good haul by anybody's maths.
Yeah.
But that half point in F1, only woman two ... just overshadows all of the rest of it, and as a result of that, I thought it did her a disservice.
Yeah.
So it's something I'd wanted to sort of at least understand a bit more about for a long time, and when I was given the opportunity to do her biography, I felt great happy days, and then a fortnight later, I found out why nobody had ever done it before. Because it was I just couldn't understand why somebody with that kind of significance to the sport hadn't had their biography done before.
Yeah.
And a fortnight after being given the green light, I realised why. Because it was pretty difficult. She gave less than 20 interviews, of any significance in her life.
I mean, I conclude that members of her family are still alive.
Yeah, but not many. She was the youngest of three. She got two older siblings. Her parents obviously long gone. If Lella was alive today, she'd be 84, 85. So we're talking a while back.
Yeah.
But most of her siblings and nieces and nephews are gone. She's only literally got a handful of surviving relatives.
Yeah.
But the big problem with trying to get behind Lella as a person, you can find out what she did, career-wise and statistically, with the right sort of research. And some of it is a bit forensic because, you're trying to find out what happened in junior formula and academy races in Italy in the 1960s, which isn't easy, but you can get there.
I mean, just putting in one of the big things I found out a few years ago, funnily enough, I was out in Italy at Monza with Jaguar, the number of small series that are indigenous to Italian. I mean, I met a couple of young racing drivers who made a living driving in various Italian series. They never needed to leave Italy to make a living at it.
Absolutely right. Yeah, and that that has been the case for decades over there. It's a sort of journeyman career, if you like, but it works. Lella was trying to get up the ladder, but racing in the junior stuff in Italy, and she'd started in the academy Formula 850 at Monza and found a feat in that. But trying to find that information is difficult, but you can get there.
Yeah.
But trying to understand her as a person was a completely different game, because her career spanned 1965 to 1988. She was an Italian, came from a Catholic country. She was actually quite devout herself, but she was gay.
Yeah.
So she put her life behind a wall to protect her partner, Fiorenza, and really didn't let anybody behind it. So she never really let the mask drop. When she'd be interviewed by journalists in the 60s and 70s, and you'd always get this question of, will you stop racing when you get married, or what would your boyfriend or husband think about it, whatever. And she would always just sort of say, oh, well, I've got no plans to get married, or, why do I need a boyfriend? I've got a car. And she was good at one-liners. So she'd say all of this sort of thing, but she'd never really say, well, although she never made any secret of the fact that she was gay, she didn't promote it, and she would have certainly not subscribed to the LGBTQ plus community in that sense, because she had no mental differentiation between the sexes. As far as she was concerned, everybody was just the same. She was, in many ways, she was kind of asexual in that way.
Well, I mean, in many ways, I've said this, it's about women racing drivers, and they tried their own series and that didn't really work. And I mean, when I was on the circuit, somebody said, oh, there's a woman racing. I said, look, it's a car with a driver. I said, I'm not bothered what they are or who they are. I said, she wants in that corner before me. I want in that corner before her. I said, racing is racing. I said, it doesn't make any difference what gender you are behind the wheel of a racing car.
That was very much her philosophy of the world. I mean, a couple of things that sort of come out of that. First, she would never have described herself as a woman racing driver, and actively made the point of saying, I'm not a woman racing driver. I'm a racing driver who's a woman.
Yeah.
And that's a distinction that I care about deeply. But she also said, under the helmet, men and women are completely equal. And, that was very much her philosophy original.
Yeah.
But she was very aware, if you like, of how society could have made life difficult for Fiorenza. She hadn't really experienced much prejudice as a child, but she was very keen to make sure that Fiorenza didn't really get sort of dragged into all of that. So as a consequence, she put her life behind a wall.
Yeah.
Even to the extent that the journalists from magazines like Auto Sprint or Auto Italia, who knew the couple well enough to go around and have dinner with them, didn't know Fiorenza's surname.
All right.
And if you go on the internet and have a Google around and look for the name of Lella Lombardi's partner, you will find Fiorenza.
Yeah.
But you will not find a surname.
Right.
It took me a long... I got it out of a guy... And thereby hangs another story, things that you don't know about people. I got the story out of Lella's dance partner.
Yeah.
So who knew that the teenage Lella Lombardi was a regional champion jive dancer?
Yeah.
Before she became a racing driver.
Yeah.
She was an athlete, but she was also a very good dancer.
Right, it's like if you the little bits of research I've been able to do. Her first drive was the family's delivery van.
Absolutely right, yeah. She was the first person in her family to know how to drive. Although her parents owned vehicles, because her parents were butchers, basically. Her dad was a butcher who made salamis and processed meats and delivered them all around the Ligurian coast. But they didn't drive themselves. They had a delivery driver. None of them were interested in driving. So she was obsessed with motorised things from an early age. One of her childhood friends told me how she used to, put her hands in her roller skates and run around the floor pretending they were cars, roll their stiff and on her feet. That was her all over. But she learned when she was about 12 or 13 of how to drive in the delivery van with the delivery driver. Her dance partner was also one of the guys who worked for her dad and used to go out driving with her. So he told me all sorts of stories of the jakes they got up to on these things. She sounded like she was a live wire.
Yeah.
So as a teenager, absolutely. They got up to all sorts of adventures.
But how did you initially make contact with the remaining the remaining family and her friends? Because that would be research in its own right, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Well, I knew that she had a surviving niece, Patricia. Italian law is a funny thing because over there, the legal heirs of people own the image and name and whatever of the deceased.
Yeah.
So I knew that Patricia was her niece Patricia. So this is her brother's daughter. Was Lella's legal heir, if you like, owns her name and rights. Yeah. So I wanted to contact her, if you like, to authorise the project. But as a consequence of that, we had a number of conversations and dialogues, and Patricia actually wrote the preface for the book for me, which is superb, really, because Patricia herself is a fascinating lady and is a very, very bright lady. She's a professor and for sustainable environmental development at the University of Turin, also addressing the COP25, and she's addressed the G8 before. She's an absolute very, very intelligent lady. Yeah. But there was a chap over in Italy as well called Giovanni Ferrara who ran a sort of fan blog, if you like, about Lella, because he'd been fascinated about her from her racing days, and he was able to connect with people like Giuseppe Bonadeo, who's the dance partner I mentioned earlier, who worked with her dad, and it's then you daisy chain these things on. If you're speaking to this person, they say, "Oh, you need to talk to so and so and so and so." One of the most helpful people I spoke to was a fella called Oscar Vercelli. Oscar was the fixer for Count Giudizzano.
Yeah.
Giudizzano, for those people who perhaps don't know about it. Zanna was a motorsport benefactor in Italy. Count to his wife was Pucci Lavazza, the Lavazza coffee brand. And Zanna was the benefactor of Ronnie Peterson. He funded Ronnie's early years. He helped buy Ronnie out of his Lotus contract. He incidentally helped buy Senna out of his Tolman contract, and helped Alboreto as well. But a lot of people don't. He's one of these guys who's in the background.
Yeah.
But, he became aware of and fascinated by the story of this sort of feisty Italian girl who was a butcher's daughter who taught herself to drive and drove herself up through the junior formula to get to where she was. So in 1974, when she was racing in Formula 5000, he and his wife had her round to dinner with a couple of other people, and Lella and Zanna's wife, Pucci Lavazza, got on quite well quite quickly, and it didn't take much for them to persuade Guy to fund her passage into Formula One.
Yeah.
So he put up 50 grand in 1975 for her to drive for March. March was absolutely on its uppers at the time.
Yeah.
They'd reduced to a one-car entry for 1975 originally, just with Brambilla. But Zanna said to him, "Well, look, I'll fund a second car, provided it's Lella that's in it." And that was how she got the gig, if you like.
Yeah.
But how Max Mosley tells it is that he'd been considering her anyway, and that it was his wife who'd said to him, if she was a bloke, you wouldn't be thinking twice about this. So why are you thinking twice about it?
Yeah.
Just crack on with it. So he always credited his wife with giving him the kick up the backside to hire her for 75. But she would have made it on merit compared to the cohort that were joining F1 at the time.
Yeah.
And let's remember there was a lot of strength in depth on that grid that year. I think I did the numbers. There's about 17 drivers on the grid either were Grand Prix winners or would become Grand Prix winners.
Yeah.
So that's no mean achievement, driving cars that have got no power steering and 500 horsepower and crash gearboxes and great big slick tyres and the rest of it. It was a physical occupation.
Yeah. Which is why they claim that no doubt this will get criticised no end. That's one of the reasons they claim a lot of women don't achieve great things in motorsport, because it's basically a strength factor. And I've spoken to women racing drivers who said, we are not as strong as the men, thereby is the problem. But modern racing cars with the power steering and everything else are easier to drive. But as you said, back in the 70s, they weren't. They had to be manhandled all the time.
Well, that's one of the ironies. Is when she's driving in Formula 5000 and 174. So, again, for those not...
The ironic thing butting in, her first entry was the 1974 British Grand Prix.
It was in S1, yeah, which was during her Formula 5000 year. She got that through the contacts of Jackie Epstein, who was entering her as in Formula 5000, driving his big Lola T330s.
Yeah.
And for those who aren't totally familiar with a Formula 5000 car, I mean, you're talking about something that's sort of midway between a Formula 1 and a Formula 2 chassis.
Yeah.
But then with a great big 5-litre stop block muscle car engine stuck in the back of it, usually a Chevrolet, which is knocking out 500 horsepower, similar to a contemporary Formula 1 engine, but probably 3 times the torque, but also with a centre of gravity that's somewhere above your shoulders.
Yeah.
The back end of the car is forever trying to overtake the front of it. Great big, F1-sized, super wide slick tyres on it. Not a lot in the way of downforce. Crash gearbox, and these things were very, very physical. Now, the contemporary journalists, the guys from Motoring News and Autosport would like to do, they would often do track tests of these things and, write up what they thought about driving them. And one of the guys from Motoring News said to Lella, these are heavy duty cars. These are. You need to be a truck driver to drive one of these.
Because I mean, just looking at photographs of her, she wasn't a big built girl, was she? She was just normal sized.
She was 5'2". She was a bit stocky, but that was it. So, but when the journalist said to us, you need to be a truck driver to drive one of these, she just pointed to her muscles and said, "Yeah, but have you seen these muscles? I am a truck driver." Bearing in mind that that's what she'd learned to do when she messed around on the Ligurian Peninsula. She was, for a girl who spoke very little English, at least until the 1980s, really, she spoke very little English. She was quite good at sort of little one-liners. In 1978, she did the Firecracker 400 NASCAR race in America. She'd been invited over there alongside Christine Beckers, and Janet Guthrie had also been invited. So you got three racing drivers in Albany who'd been brought in to contest this NASCAR race, and basically as part of Bill France's attempts to see if they could bring women drivers into the sport. So one of the redneck journalists says to Lella before the race, "How's a little itsy bitsy girl like you managed to handle one of these 2-litre Behemoth Banjo Matthews tube chassis ships?" And she just looks at him and says, "I've got to drive it. I haven't got to carry it."
I mean, just butting in. I mean, over the years, I've dealt with a lot of lady racing drivers and rally drivers, and the one thing I would say, the bonus of them over the men, they have a fantastic sense of humour. You can have a cracking conversation with the ladies in the paddocks, far better with them than the men at times.
I think it was interesting that one of the interesting things I found about when I was doing the research, either people who knew her who I spoke to, or people who spoke about her in contemporary reports and things, I didn't find anybody who had a bad word to say about her.
Yeah.
Now that's unusual in any kind of walk of life, isn't it? But it's particularly unusual in sport, where rivalries and personalities get magnified by competition. And everybody seems to get on with her well, and she's okay. Some of them said, she kept herself to herself for the reasons that we know, but she was popular and outgoing. But she something else that I discovered that I completely wasn't expecting was that she was a really good test and development driver. Now, again, that's probably my fault for not expecting to see that, but she was absolutely the go-to person for setting up the cars in the sort of Formula 3 and Formula 5000 era that she was going to. And when after she finished in Formula 1 and she was racing for Acela in sports cars, and particularly for Alfa Romeo in touring cars, the other drivers in the team would get her to do the setup, and she would then then they would race with the settings that she'd identified for them.
Yeah.
And bear in mind that when she was driving for Alfa Romeo, a lot of the time her co-driver was Giorgio Francia. Now Francia was a Formula 2, Formula 3 driver who had been associated with Auto Delta for a long, long time, and from 77 onwards, he was Auto Delta's official test driver. So every race car of any description that came out of Auto Delta from 77 onwards until his career ended was tested and developed by Francia. So all of the F1 stuff and the rest of it all came through his hands. Yeah. So he was no mean shakes. But when they were racing in touring cars together, half the time, she'd be doing the setup and he'd be having a cue. And so, but he was, she was the real deal. One of the mechanics was telling me that who used to work with her in the latter days of the ETCC, he was telling me that he tried the old mechanic's trick on her once, that she came in and asked for a tweak on the front roll bar, and he pretended to do it and did do it.
Yes.
Just to see if she knew what she did. So she came in after one lap, pops up a visor and said, "Do that one more time and I'll punch you in the face." So, yeah, she was, she had great mechanical sympathy and understanding in that sense, and I wasn't expecting to learn that.
Yeah. I mean, how were you able to track down all these people? Did one lead to another, to another, to another? And who was responsible in the first instance for getting you access to these people? And finally, did you go over to Italy to talk to
them? It was very much a question of one person leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. A lot of it is just the process of pouring through research where you will read an article, find a name, see if you can then find that person, see if they're still alive, see if they can tell you anything, see if they can tell you where to go.
Yeah.
I did read 17,500 pages of Italian newspapers to try and understand what was, every reference, if you like, that I could find to her or for the early part of her career. And that was useful for some of the early stuff.
So I conclude you're now fluent in Italian.
I can read Italian, but still can't speak it.
All right.
I'm fluent in French, which helps because they're similar rooted languages, but I really do need to learn to speak it. I've not been over there to do it. I was fortunately able to do most of the research remotely. Otherwise, I would have spent an awful lot of time over there, which wouldn't have been a bad thing. Sure. I'd have got it the way the rest of that. But others of it is, yes, you talk to one person, they say, oh, therefore you need to speak to this one and this one and this one. There were a handful of people from the early days, people like Ferreira and Bonadeo and whatever, who were very helpful in signposting me towards other people. But the passage of time has means that people are now more willing to talk about that era than they might have been at the time. Unfortunately, Firenze, Lella's partner, died a year after Lella did, so she's long gone as well.
Yeah.
But I spoke to enough people who knew them as a couple to be able to form a properly three-dimensional view of them, if you like.
Yeah. So, I mean, I conclude they would have been happy to talk to you, and were they at all surprised that after all this time somebody wanted to write what you might call the biography?
Well, but bearing in mind that nobody had done it, they weren't so much surprised as delighted.
Yeah.
Everybody was very pleased that her story was being told because the village she came from was tiny. There were 2,000 people who lived there. So that little community is very proud of her in its own way. There's a little park that's named after her, and a bus stop in there that actually looks nothing like her.
That's your next job. Get one done that looks like her.
And this was funded by the village's buyer or a local sculptor or whatever, so it obviously means a lot to them.
Yeah.
But surprisingly, she's not as well known in Italy, and certainly wasn't at the time as well known in Italy as she was over here or in Australia. She was well known over here particularly because of her Formula 5000 exploits, and then because of the F1 stuff, which obviously received all like coverage. She did 2 Formula 5000 races in Australia in 1974, nearly won both of them. Ran out of fuel in the first one and fuel packed up in the second one.
Yeah.
But she'd absolutely got the local boys beaten. And we're talking about people like Max Stewart and Kevin Bartlett, Warwick Brown, who were the real deal there.
Well, the other thing in Formula 5000, she would probably have been maybe up against Brian Redman, who was a multiple champion at it.
Yeah, well, certainly, in Britain in '74, if you look down at the list of people who she was racing at in '74 over here, and I can actually do that because of what I'm working on at the moment. But so in '74, Rotherham's European Formula 5000 Championship, Bo Evans, Peter Geffen, Ian Ashley, Teddy Pillett, David Hobbs, Vern Schuppert, Tom Belso, Brian Redmond, Chris Craft, Mike Wiles, Clive Shanto, Damien McGee, Guy Edwards, Tony Dean, Brian Maguire, Keith Holland, Derek Bell, Eddie Kaiser. Yeah, and that's just the top end of the list.
Yeah.
these are seriously competitive guys, who don't mess about, and you've got, Redmond, probably the finest Formula 5000 driver there's ever been.
Yeah. And probably one of the world's greatest sports car drivers.
Absolutely right. Yes, fantastic. We'll go off on all sorts of tangents there, but and similarly, if you look at who she raced against in Formula One in '75, as you run down that grid, you've got Lauda and Regazzoni, Fittipaldi, Mas, Scheckter, Dupaille, Brambilla, Lafitte, Jones. That's just sort of 9 or 10 people who are Grand Prix winners straight off of the cuff. I think
and world champions, or future world champions.
You've got half a dozen future, either present or future world championship. Peterson, you've got half a dozen present and future world champions, and I think 17 in total guys who had won or would win Grand Prix. And she's mixing it with all of them and manages to. Okay. The Spanish Grand Prix was a bit of an oddity in '75 because of the circumstances of it, but nonetheless she was still there and won 6 when a lot of people weren't. Robin Herd reckoned that her best race actually in '75 was the German Grand Prix where she finished 7th.
Yeah,
where she put in a real storming draft. Everybody but the people. So Reutemann won it and Lafitte came second. Yeah, were the only 2 people in that race who didn't have a puncture. Everybody else had at least one. But, she came home 7th in that, just quietly got on with it and in a strong field on the Nürburgring, which she'd never seen before, 7th in a car that wasn't handling well at all.
Yeah.
She was there on merit, not just making up the numbers.
I mean, the other thing is you look at bits and pieces of her past, and it's like she was the first female racing driver to qualify and compete in the 1974 Race of Champions at Brands Hatch, racing a Lola Chevrolet prototype. I mean, she did staggering things like the 6 hour of Pugusa and 6 hour of Vallelunga. I mean, like a lot of the drivers of that era, besides single-seaters, they drove sports cars and prototypes, and by the looks of it, she did very well in that as well.
Well, when you look at the appendix at the back of the book, and the sheer number of races that she did, and as you've highlighted, post-Formula One, she did a huge variety of stuff. She did the Group 6 prototypes, she raced in Interserie, she raced touring cars in all different levels of touring cars as well. She was racing a little sort of 1600 Fiat in 1978 in touring cars, and in 1981 when she befriended Anna Cambiaghi, who's a great fun lady, who she'd raced with previously, but in 81 Anna Cambiaghi had organised a drive with Luigi Racing of Belgium to do the European Touring Car Championships, and she asked Lella to join them. So if you've got 2 sort of 5'2" Italian ladies driving in the European Touring Car Championship, what do you give them to drive? I know, let's give them a Chevrolet Camaro. So and they had a great time with it. The car was going to be outlawed at the end of the year, but they had fun with this thing. Although Anna said to me, she said, how do I put it? The first race of that year was Donington. She said, Donington is, how you say, a little brake. Is big brake. Camaro is a little brake. She said, if you were at Monza and a smaller car was on your tail, you hope they didn't go into the corner ahead of you, because if they did, you were taking them out because you couldn't stop. So they were manhandling this thing all around the ETC in 81. So she was driving things like 76 is an interesting year for her, because that 76 was the year her Formula One career fell apart.
Yeah.
But you've got at one end, you've got her racing sort of for March and for Ram in Formula One. But you've also got her racing in Citroen Diane 2CV Cross, Palicairo in Italy. So literally bouncing around in 2CVs in Rallycross in the same year that she's doing F1. And she's also doing sports cars and whatever, so a very, very eclectic career.
Yeah.
82 onwards, she only raced in touring cars. So 82 through to 88, she was racing in touring cars. But she was kind of the mainstay of Alfa Romeo's scene with the Jolly Cup squad driving, GTV6s, beautiful, beautiful things. And with a succession of co-drivers, winning lots of aspects in those. So yeah, very eclectic.
I mean, in about 89, she retired from driving and founded her own team, Lombardi Motorsport. I mean, how did that go? Was her team able to capitalise on her and what she'd done and what she could do?
Yeah, I mean, that team was founded very much. She had a view of a life past driving. She always said, "I'll stop driving when I'm either when I'm scared or when I'm no longer competitive."
Yeah.
And the reasons were different, which we can come on to. But so but the idea of founding her team was to kind of have an academy for almost grassroots level motorsport to help young or poorly off Italian drivers, or guys who, they weren't necessarily from the top draw, but to try and help get them on the ladder and help share her experience and skills. So there again, after she retired, she was doing a lot of the setup work for them for all the reasons that were said. And she set up with Bruno Raimondi, who had been her mechanic at Alfa Romeo in the touring car area. They were winning class wins and junior championships almost straight after they were touring. It was touring karting.
Yeah.
Sort of right from the off, they were doing it. But unfortunately, in the mid '80s, she'd had a sailing accident. She'd been helming a boat, I think in Lasinge, in the lake of Lasinge, and had been hit by the boom.
Yeah.
As the sail came across, hit her in the chest, and she experienced pain for quite a while afterwards, and eventually went to the doctors about it, and the pain that she thought was a consequence of being hit by the boom was actually breast cancer.
Yeah.
And it was aggressive and quite severely advanced. So it was that and the deterioration in her health that forced her to stop racing rather than any sort of lack of competitiveness or ability. She was finding that she no longer had the stamina to do touring car races.
Yeah.
So she still tested the cars for the team and did all the setup afterwards, but that's all caused her retirement at the beginning of '89. But she had a brief but fierce battle with cancer until the beginning of 1992, and she died 3 weeks short of her 51st birthday.
Yeah.
So it's it's a bit of a twist in the tale for her. And the real nasty twist with that, as I said to you before, Fiorenza died the following year, but she died of the same thing. So it's, it was a bit of a suck around for all of them.
Yeah.
So her life was an absolute roller coaster in many ways, but she was pretty much racing all the way through it.
Yeah. I mean, we've had various lady F1 drivers, but from what I can gather, she was the pioneer. Apart from Mike De Filippi's, she was the pioneer of women in F1 and motorsport. As I said, we had Helen Nice all those years ago, pre-war, drove Bugatti and various other things, but she really was the trailblazer for all this. So,
I mean, there are quite a few women pre-war who had raced in all sorts of classes of the sport, and you could write a book about that. But the De Philippis, who was around in the 50s, as you say, was a different kettle of fish from Lella, insofar as she was a countess, she was wealthy, she bought her own car, she ran her own team. This was a time when you would approach a national organisation and make your own race entry and the rest of it. So she was coming at it from the point of wealth and privilege. That's not to say that she was not capable driver, but she wasn't in Lella's class as a driver.
Yeah.
Interestingly, Graham Hill, who Lella certainly didn't like him for a whole load of reasons. But Graham's a man who divides opinion, but there's a story in there that in the book about why. But anyway, Hill had raced against De Philippis and also against Lella in '74. He made the comment, he was the only driver on the grid at that time who raced against De Philippis and raced against Lella. And he said, yeah, De Philippis was there, but this wasn't Lombardi, it was something else.
Yeah.
He didn't speak of them and say a breath. I asked Val Musetti what he thought of Lella, because a lot of people, rate of their contemporaries or almost contemporaries to say that Desiree Wilson was the best of them. That she was like that at the end here. But I asked Val Musetti what he thought about it, because he'd raced against Lella and Desiree Wilson and Davide Galizia in period. Yeah. And he said, yeah, Lella was the best. She was naturally the quickest and the most capable, and also needed the less support. Desi was good, but she needed a bit more support around her and a bit more of a different system.
Yeah.
And Davina was a good skier, but and a capable driver, but not of the class of the other two. But Musetti was absolutely straight off the bat that Lella was the best in her era.
Yeah.
And when I've spoken to a lot of the guys from that era, as well as people who co-drive with her. I think I spoke to all of the surviving co-drivers, and they all rated her very highly.
Yeah.
She wasn't there just to make up numbers in any of the classes that she did. She was there because she could do the job, but she would have been completely turned off by the idea of segregated series, things like Formula W and F1 Academy and that sort of thing. She was dead against that kind of thing. She was very much of the view that if the girls are good enough, then they're good enough. You don't need to create a separate series for us.
Funnily enough, I've spoken to a few women racing drivers and they've all said the same thing. They do not agree with Formula W. They just said, if you're going to race, get in your car, get out there and do it.
The problem is of course the size of talent pools that, if for any one guy to get to the absolute top, you need probably 1,000 guys in the pool at the bottom.
Yeah.
It's easier to find, 1,000 blokes to put into the pool than it is to find 1,000 girls to put into the pool. And because of that, speed of the renewal of the pool or the evaporation of the pool means that it's very hard to generate the ones who will go all the way.
Yeah.
It's I understand why there is a motivation for it. I mean, the forward for the book is written by Susie Wolf, who's obviously running the F1 Academy, which is trying to help with the bringing women through to the high levels of the sport.
Yeah.
And I was keen to have sort of her view on it, and that's why she wrote the forward. But when I was able to get through the layers of personnel at Mercedes-AMG to talk to her, she was very keen. She said, "Yeah, I'd be honoured doing this," because although she'd obviously never raced against Lella in period, and that she'd been a child when Lella's career ended. She was aware of her and aware of her importance.
Yeah.
So even 50 years since she scored that half point. It's 30 plus years since she died. The echoes are still there.
Yeah. What's been the family, for want of better terms, reaction to the book and the other people that you spoke to? Because I conclude they will have all seen a copy of the book.
Well, Patricia's copies are waiting for her back at her office because she's still in Brazil at the moment.
All right.
And won't be back until it's the 18th. Oh, she's back today.
Yeah.
So Patricia will have seen it for the first time. Obviously, she's read bits of it and she's seen brushes of parts of it, but she's not seen the whole thing.
Yeah.
But those of them who have seen it have been delighted with they're all delighted with the fact that it exists.
Yeah.
And the fact that even though it's 30 odd years after the event, after she went, but that somebody's taken the trouble really to write some kind of celebration about their remarkable relative.
Yeah. I mean, in many ways, I suppose you could say they'll look at it and they could be thinking, thank you very much, about time.
Yes. I mean, that my view is it's absolutely about time. I can't believe that this wasn't done a long, long time ago. You know, why it wasn't done in 1992 when she died, I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, there were a few good sort of obituaries that were written. Franco Lini did a good one for the Gazzetta dello Sport, which made the front page of Gazzetta dello Sport. But, you know, there wasn't as much done as you would have expected there to be.
Yeah.
And I know that, you know, it was still a difficult time really, and people weren't necessarily as open as they are now. But I've not been able to understand why at some point between the end of her career and now, why nobody has really examined just her significance to the sport in general.
Yeah.
And that, as much as anything, was a motivation to do it, as well as just being the fascination of finding out more about it. But you know, it was a very rewarding book to research, in the sense that the more that you researched and the more that you read, the more you were entertained by it,
Yeah.
the more you liked it.
Yeah. Now, the book is out. What is the book's full title?
The book's full title is Lella Lombardi, The Tigress of Turin, her authorised biography. And let's just reflect on the moment for that the Tigress of Turin is a name that John Webb of Brands Hatch came up with because he thought that British audiences would have no idea where Alessandria is, let alone Frigarolo. So it's called The Tigress of Turin, which was the name that he came up with. Lella Lombardi, The Tigress of Turin, her authorised biography, published by Douglas Luridge Publications.
Now, you alluded to it the last time we spoke. What's next for Jon Saltinstall? Because it's getting to the stage I can't keep up with all these books, because they're vast things, and you think, God, it must take him years to do. No.
It does take up a lot of time, but I'm fortunate in that 2 years ago I retired from the day job, so I've now got a bit more time on my hands. And the networks that you build up as from doing one help with the networks for the next one. So you can build up a bit of a body of research. Now, doing the work on the Lella books kind of indirectly helped me with the next project. Which is for Ebro, who did the Ix and Lauda books. And we are working on a worldwide history of Formula 5000. Ebro recently did a book on Formula 3000.
Which is an excellent book, which I reviewed.
Which you enjoyed, as I saw from your review. And as a consequence of that, Mark Hughes approached me and said, do you fancy having a look at worldwide history of Formula 5000? And obviously doing Lella's book had given some useful contacts to work with for Formula 5000. But inevitably, these things always grow arms and legs, don't they? You know, so I thought I knew what was going on with Formula 5000 until I started researching it. And you find that obviously you've got the USA, where it started as Formula A from 1968 through to 1976. Then you've got the UK and Europe, where it ran from 69 to 75. Then you've got Australia, where it ran from 1970 to 1982. And you've got a couple of years in Canada, 69, 70, and probably 5-year period in South Africa as well, where it was mixed with the other local formula. So you've got you've almost got 3 books with the USA, Europe and Australia, but doing that any kind of 3-book exercise is clearly impractical and affordable. So we're trying to create a book. It won't be as big as X.
Yeah. Thank God for that. I have trouble lifting that up.
All 3.5 kilos.
Yes.
It'll probably be a little bit bigger than the 3000 book, but not as big as X. But we've got all sorts of interesting stuff going on. I've scoped it out, so I know kind of how it's going to feel. I've got Brian Redman writing the foreword for the US bit.
Yeah.
Bob Evans is writing the foreword for the British bit. and Warwick Brown has written the foreword for the Australian bit. So we've got 3 of the surviving Formula 5000 champions who have got the names on it.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of interviews to do now to try and talk to them. But again, it's sadly, as is the case with so many things in this era, it's a bit of a shrinking population. A lot of the protagonists are gone, and those that are left, a lot of them are knocking on a bit now. So we have narrow windows of opportunity to capture stories and the recollections of these people and curate their memories.
Yeah.
That's one of the motivations for doing these things quickly. There's a few of us, the guys like Richie Jenkins and Dan Banks, Kevin Guthrie, who all have a similar sort of worldview of these things, that we've got to try and capture these memories and recollections and get them down, get them recorded as pieces of social history as much as they are of pieces of sporting history, while the opportunity exists, because in 10 years' time, a lot of these people won't be here.
I've tried the similar thing with rally drivers. It's a very slow process, but to try and interview some of the famous rally drivers from many years ago. And the one thing, I was due to interview Paddy Hopkirk, and very unfortunately, he passed away about a week before I was due to record the interview with him.
That happens a lot. If I was to look back, the people who I've interviewed for Lauda or X or for the Forever Young book or for Lella, and I think, well, hang on, there's a fair few of them who aren't here now. There were 3 people, I think, who died between me interviewing them for Lella's book and it being published.
Yeah,
it's quite alarming, really. But when you're dealing with a generation of people, a lot of whom now are north of 80 years old, it's probably not surprising. But it's that's why it's important to do these things, and just having the books exist. Incidentally, one of the things that we did with Lella, and thanks very much to Guy Loveridge, my publisher, for facilitating this, is that with Lella's book, we've held the retail price back to 40 quid, which for a book of the size and quality, the production job they've done on it, it's very reasonable for a niche publication. But the reason for doing that was we wanted to try and make it accessible to a younger and possibly more female audience as well, as the traditional anoraks like me. Because, I'm not suggesting that an 18-year-old girl's going to go out and spend 40 quid on a book, but a mum might. I don't think a mum would necessarily go out and spend 60 quid on a book, but hopefully by doing a move like that, the motivation was A, for the book to exist, and B, for it to be accessible for a readership to be able to understand Lella's story and what sort of a person she was, really, because she was remarkable.
I mean, ironically, you mentioned that. I mean, a lot of the books I'm fortunate enough to review, which means I get a review copy sent to me. You're telling people, this is a great book, go and spend 80, 90, 120 pounds on it. And you think, the way things are at the moment, people won't be able to afford that, possibly. But on the plus side, and talking to Rebecca Leopard, who represents Everall, last year was a fantastic year for books, and apparently 2025 has been a better year still. And I still like books. I am not a download person. There is something pleasurable about holding a book and turning a page.
I agree with you entirely at that. There's this kind of it's an always visceral personal experience, isn't there, in receiving a book and opening it and hearing the creak of the spine and the smell of the new print pages and whatever. It's a bit like back in the day when you'd buy a new gatefold LP and open it up and see all the colours and interaction and smell the vinyl and the rest of it. But I agree with you about the the physicality of holding a book, and also photo reproduction on a page is very different from photo reproduction on a screen, I think, as well. And for a lot of these books are all very visual and rely on imagery to illustrate the narrative. Certainly where you've got something like the Lella book, where you've got really oddball early photos that nobody's ever seen, or with something like the Forward 5000 book we're talking about here, which because that was such a visual and really almost artistically impressive sport. The cars were very engaging, photogenic in a way that perhaps some of the modern stuff isn't. And to have that on the printed page and to be able to linger over it is quite rewarding.
Well, it's like you said, one particular photograph of Lombardi shows her walking through a paddock, helmet in one hand, but her race numbers in the other, which not only gives it a location, but actually gives it a time, because she'd only just got there because she was only just going to put the numbers on it.
Absolutely. And there's so much that photos tell you when you can take the time to sit and study them. And that's a great case in point, isn't it? What is this picture telling me? And there's all sorts of odd things. How the hell did the person take that photo at the time? Or how lucky were they to be in the right place at the right time? There's a bit of a sort of grainy one from Formula 3 racing Monza in 1972, where there was a fire in a pit, but somebody's managed to snap her, pulling her car away from the pit garage while all the bodywork's burning in the background. And you think just somebody happened to be lucky enough to be there at the time to snap that, because it can't have happened for very long.
No, I will say that's the benefit, excuse me, of modern photographic equipment. Everybody knows that one of my great friends is Marie-Catherine Linney, who's regarded as one of France's best motorsport photographers. And with her latest up-to-date Canon gear, some of the images she gets, her speciality is in the pits and paddocks, and some of the images she can get because of the speed of the camera and her ability to, shall we say, predict within a moment or two what's going to unfold in front of it. That's where
just at the right spot. That's the skill, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's the speed of the modern camera that allows it to capture these. So, but no, long may you continue, Jon Saltinstall. I shall be reviewing the book when Guy Loveridge sends me one. Apparently it is due to be on its way to me. But once again, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. I conclude that in about 2 years' time, I'll be talking to you about F5000.
Quite probably. I've got to get the manuscript to Mark Hughes by the end of next year, so that will be my...
Also, it'll only be 12 months before I'm talking to you.
Well, that's only getting the manuscript here. There'll be another year of editing, putting it all together and the rest of it, so it probably will be at least a couple of years. I've been working on it since we finished writing Lella, so that I've already been playing around with it for the best part of a year.
But once again, Jon Saltinstall, thank you very much for joining me on the Backseat Driver.
Thank you very much for having me, Mark. It's always a pleasure.